Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. Tonight's my story is I'm going to talk about SureFoot, and I'm going to give you some background on that and show you videos and answer any questions that anybody might have on SureFoot. So the story began 12 years ago, actually, May 2012. And I was working with a horse named Dante, and I had been working with him for 3 years and largely giving him Feldenkrais lessons. So Feldenkrais is the lecture that I did a couple weeks ago. If you're interested in learning more about Feldenkrais, please watch that webinar. And basically, it's about learning new possibilities of movement. Given that it's hands-on and it's nonverbal communication, meaning from my body to the horse's body, communicating to our nervous systems, I can work with horses as well as people. And this particular horse, Dante, had 3 years before I met him, he had flipped over a stall door and injured himself, and he wasn't right for a long time. So his owner brought him to me, and I started giving him Feldenkrais lessons, and he loved them. In fact, when they would come for a lesson, if I was going to work with the rider, she'd have to come without Dante, because if Dante showed up, he would make it so that I had to work on him. Anyway, in May 2012, Dante arrived, and he was lame in the right hind leg. And it turned out that she had switched her saddle from a dressage saddle to a jumping saddle, and it wasn't straight. She was riding in that jumping saddle for the lesson on the Monday, and we took it off, and I looked at it. It was clearly crooked, and it was putting pressure on the back right quarter of his lower back. She had her dressage saddle in the trailer, so we switched out to the dressage saddle, but he was still short in the right hind leg. And it actually turned out that the farrier had also quicked him that month as well. So a lot going on with that right hind leg. That night, I went home and I was talking to my dear friend, Dr. Joyce Harmon. Many of you probably know her from the webinars. I've had many webinars with Joyce. And we were talking, and she was going to start standing at her computer instead of sitting. So in 2012, this whole idea of a standing desk was a brand new concept. It was at its very fledgling point in time. And she wanted a pad to stand on. So while we were talking, she started telling me about how they were using different kinds of pads for inputting information for dogs. In other words, they were using a lot of air-filled types of equipment to have the dog stand on to improve their balance and work with rehabilitation. So while I'm talking to Joyce on the phone, I flipped open my laptop and I'm tapping away and I'm looking at what they're doing with dogs, and I see them standing on a variety of unstable surfaces, if you will, different types, all air-filled. And I said to Joyce, I said, "Do you think that would work for a horse?" And she said, "I don't know, but time it for 15 seconds. So the next day I was going to see Dante again. I saw him twice every month, Monday, Tuesday. And the next day I went into my shed. I grabbed a pad out of my shed. I drove to the lesson, and the rider was already on board. And I walked over and I picked up his right hind foot and I set it on the pad and I timed it for 15 seconds, and he walked off sound. He walked off completely different in 15 seconds. It totally blew my mind, still does. And that was the beginning of SureFoot. So that day I worked with him during his lesson, and he would only let me do the back feet. And then the next horse that came in for a lesson was a quarter horse who had a really poor canter. He had done Western pleasure, and the rider wanted to event him. He would only let me do his front feet. But at the end of the session, we had this beautiful round canter. The next horse was a Haflinger owned by Catherine Wyckoff, one of my dear friends and fellow Feldenkrais practitioners. And I knew Andy, her horse Andy, really well. And we used the pads, and he didn't care what foot we put it under. And we had a beautiful round canter. So in 3 hours, I played with 3 very different horses and had basically a very similar result in all 3. I knew at that moment that I had really kind of tripped onto something, discovered something that was really going to be unique and special for horses, because it was the horses that showed me that it made a difference. We weren't trying to train them. We weren't training them to stand on anything. We weren't training them to move in a different way afterward. We simply were experimenting with 15 seconds of foot and just the feet that they wanted, and then watching them move in a completely different way. And of course, the number one question that I get about SureFoot is how does it work? How is that happening? And while we have more educated guesses than we've ever had before, they're still educated guesses. I had a great webinar with Dr. Hassler a few months ago. If you haven't seen that webinar, it's a really great one. We talked about proprioception. So proprioception is something that it works using what's called mechanoreceptors. So throughout your body, there are receptors that can feel difference in temperature, difference in pressure, and difference in stretch. And these wide variety of receptors are very prevalent in joints, in your feet, and of course in the horse's feet. And by placing them on SureFoot pads, we can see that we're influencing those mechanoreceptors and therefore influencing proprioception. So proprioception is your ability to know where your body is in space. If you have ever walked down a set of stairs in the dark and you were walking down and everything's great, you're able to do that because your proprioceptors, your nervous system, knows where that stair is, knows where your body is in space. And so you can do this in a very elegant way. I mean, when you stop to think about that kind of activity, how you don't have to watch your feet for every step you take, you realize that your body and your brain is working a lot in background, kind of like your computer, and keeping everything in place, keeping everything working, keeping everything in balance, and firing everything at the appropriate time. But then if you've ever walked down the stair and you thought you were at the landing and it turned out there was one more step, your whole nervous system organized for that step that wasn't there, and you lurch forward and catch yourself, hopefully. And that's because your body organized for that step being there when it wasn't. In that way, these receptors can become set. And the way I think about it is, if you have the thermostat at your house set for 80 degrees and you don't realize that you have a way to adjust it, you'll just keep coming in and out of the house. It's 80 and you'll adapt to that 80 degrees and that will be normal for you. And so the nervous system, the proprioceptors, the sensors can become set, and that they're always operating at sort of like that thermostat at one temperature. And then with SureFoot, what we think happens is that it's resetting those receptors. It's giving them, because it's unstable, it's waking them up in a different way and bringing in that awareness that, oh, wait a second, maybe I can adjust the thermostat. Maybe I can have it at 73 instead of at 80 all the time. So that's kind of a simple way to think about it. That's the way I find makes sense to me, is that, you know, there are receptors that get set like your thermostat, and it just keeps operating that way all the time. But when we come in and bring in some awareness, you discover that, hey, there's this thing on the wall and you can adjust the temperature by pressing on that thing on the wall. With that awareness, you can change the temperature. With that awareness, the horse changes the experience, the balance that he has in relation to the ground. Now, that's just one mechanism, proprioception. It seems counterintuitive that we can reset proprioceptors. Since the goal is to help so somebody's asking a question. She says, since the goal is to help balance the horse with pads, how do you determine that you can use different types of pads, for example, at the same time, at the same time of pads at the same time? I'm a little confused about the last part, but I'll get to that as I explain kind of like, in a way, this is not different than what we do with people all the time. Okay, so basically think of proprioceptors. They get to a set point, it becomes a habit, pads come in, horse experiences something different, wakes it up, is allowing it to change. One of the things that we see like almost instantly is breathing changes. Like we can see breathing changes. We used to time it, that there were breathing changes in 3 to 10 seconds. And one might ask, well, how are you influencing breathing? And I don't really have a good answer for that. I can talk about changing the parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system. This we can see very clearly because when you place horses on pads, you see them show signs of relaxation, increased blinking, licking and chewing, sighing, yawning, head lowering. So in some way, we're influencing that parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system. We're down-regulating the horse. He's becoming more rest and digest, less sympathetic fight and flight, more parasympathetic rest and digest. The actual mechanism by which that's happening, we're not really sure. Dr. Stephen Peters said basically that in some way I found like a channel for changes in neurochemicals, those neurochemicals creating that relaxation and that change in behavior. When you talk to people who talk about fascia, they're all going to say that we're influencing fascia. And I totally agree, because the hoof is a sensory organ. It's full of all kinds of sensors. It's got lots of fascia. It's got blood flow. There's so much going on in that foot that we're affecting all those different systems. So some people might say that we're changing blood flow in the foot. That's very, very possible based on some research that Dr. Bowker did, where he saw the change in Doppler blood flow in a foot that was not on a washcloth when they were looking at that effect of changing blood flow. So he wasn't surprised at all that we see these kinds of changes with SureFoot pads. So you've got mechanoreceptors, which are influencing proprioception, where you are in space. You've got fascia, you've got blood flow, you've got some sort of neurochemical release, because we see that in the change in behavior. And the thing that I find the most interesting isn't so much the changes that we see when a horse is on SureFoot pads, but the changes that stick after they've come off. And so this is where I'm fascinating. And someday I'm hoping that somebody will do some research and will look at the brain activity in the horse to see what lights up when they're on SureFoot pads and see what stays lit up afterward. Because there are so many stories of horses that they put the horse on SureFoot pads. It wouldn't go through a gate. A horse just wouldn't go through a gate. They did SureFoot pads, horse walks through a gate. Horse keeps walking through a gate. Not a problem anymore. Horse change in movement. Moon Pie is one of my favorite examples. She had Lyme disease, and after Lyme disease, she was trotting with her head like totally parallel to the ground. And we did one SureFoot session. The next day, I needed her for another video. Her head came totally straight, walk, trot, and canter both directions. Never had to do it again. And so just like anything, there are these outliers where you see a huge change with as little as one session. But then the most horses really want to see SureFoot pads repeating over a period of time. So how do we think about this? How do we kind of wrap our brain around what we're doing with pads and how to apply it to our horses? There are three primary things to think about: the density, duration, and frequency. So density is the density of the pad, and we have variable density, everything from hard, firm, medium, soft, and then there's slants. And so we're changing different densities to bring in different levels of awareness or different levels of squish or different levels of demand. In other words, the more unstable the surface, the more demanding it is. I often find that people overestimate their horse's stability and choose a pad that's too unstable to start with. And I think it's important to realize that you're better off starting with a harder pad and introducing that to your horse and seeing how he responds to that, and then gradually progressing into a more unstable pad. Now, we've got a terrific amount of evidence for doing this with humans. So if you've ever had to go to physical therapy, say you had a knee replacement or something like that, you would know that the physical therapist does not start with the most difficult exercise to begin. They start with something that you can master, that you can do. And they ask you to do that for a while before increasing the difficulty. They use pads in human rehabilitation, and they start with harder ones and move to softer ones. So in the same way, you want your horse to be successful, you don't want to surprise him. Some Mustangs can be quite upset by feeling an unstable surface if they've lived on the range, because that could be threatening to their life. So you're always better off starting harder. And given that you're talking about a horse that's anywhere from, a pony that's 600 pounds up to a 1,800 pound horse, even the hard pad is going to give to that horse's weight. But then you gradually can start increasing the instability by moving through the different pads, which is why we have different densities. So you would start with something like a half physio pad, which is our lowest profile and most stable. You would then move to the hard pad, which is 2 inches, or you could start with the hard pad. And then the hard slant, and I'll have videos and pictures of this in a little while, but just to explain it first. Hard slant, same material as hard, just an angle. And then we go firm, firm slant, soft, and medium. I tend to think of medium as the most demanding, the most challenging, because it's springy. So it's not the one I would ever start with a horse. I would start certainly with like a half physio or hard, and then I might be able to go like firm and then medium. But you do have to realize that because it's springy, it kind of bounces back a bit. And while people, it's their favorite ones, we have to be careful with the horses that we don't overface them. Again, I think that people overestimate their horse's balance and stability. And that's what I often see, is that they choose something too soft rather than starting harder and familiarizing themselves and the horse with the process, and then moving into the softer pads. And of course, when you think about it, we can individualize each hoof. We can offer a different experience under each hoof, which, as we progress in this process, that becomes a richer, more interesting environment. And then you'll find that horses actually will prefer, they'll pick, they'll choose, they'll show you which pads they like the best. And then, of course, they get to have what they like. So density, we have the different densities, which gradually increases the instability, making it more demanding. And you want to start with something that's less demanding and then gradually move through. That means it's a progressive system, just the way we see with people. Duration is the next thing to consider. And duration is how long the horse stays on a pad. In many cases, a horse might not stay on it for even 15 seconds or 30 seconds in the beginning, which is totally fine. Dante, the very first horse I did remember, it was only 15 seconds and the horse completely changed. So I find a lot of people want to make it a very long time on the pads, but there's a caution about that. Just like an exercise program for people, you have to build up to being on unstable surfaces for longer periods of time. It's demanding. It's asking your little tiny postural muscles to work. You'll see horses that I'll show you videos that are unstable, that are swaying. You've got to decrease your duration if you see that they're unstable. You've got to think about gradually strengthening them, not over demanding. And the reason I make such a point about this is that I recently had someone send me an email, and he said, someone recommended that he get SureFoot pads. So he got the medium pad, and his horse had a stifle problem, and he put him on the pad for 20 minutes, and the horse buckled when he came off. And I personally was horrified that anybody would start an idea of a horse with a weak stifle and have them stand on an unstable surface for 20 minutes. But in that process, again, there's no choice. There's no exploration. There's no awareness. It becomes something other than the idea of giving the horse choice and offering. And I think that this is where we sometimes get confused between physical therapy, I've got to do so many reps to be better, and the idea that the horse actually, his nervous system can rapidly change to the different environments, to the different pads, and that we have to be careful not to overdo it. You can build up to 5 minutes, you can build up to longer times, but again, that's something you do gradually over time, not like just starting out. You can't take it back. If you make the horse sore, you can't unsore them. You can't undo it. And recently I had a horse that came to me, and she had had a very serious injury a long time ago. It had a deep, deep scar. And the woman was using therapy, and she was improving the scar, and things were getting better. But the horse was moving in a pattern based on that scar. And I did SureFoot with this horse, and I only used the hard pads, and I only used like hard and hard slant. And I kept my duration really short. And even still, the next day the horse was sore because we made such a change in the way she moved. And so when you're starting with any horse, remember, you want to start gradually. You can build over time. You can increase your duration. You can play with the different densities. But as you go up in instability, you need to drop down in duration. Once you see how the horse is going to respond, you see whether or not, he's moving better the next day, or that, he's not sore or whatever, then you can gradually increase. But again, you don't want to get too excited. I had one student where the first day she really listened to me. She did very short duration. The next day she got really excited and had the horse stand on the pads for a lot longer period of time. And the next day the mare was sore and told her, no, I'm not doing this. So remember, we've got to make this something that is listening to our horses and recognizing that even if they want to stay on the pads, we have to be the good parent and in the beginning say, okay, that's long enough, until we see how they respond over time. And that's the thing that's so important, is to kind of track, well, on day 1, I did 15 seconds a foot. On day 2, they are standing longer. They want to stay. Okay, maybe I'll increase it to 30 seconds. But it's that gradual increase, and then responding to that and watching the horse, allowing them the opportunity to walk off. And I think that's another thing that's really important, is people think they have to make the horse stay on the pads. Really, that is not important. I've seen horses literally just touch the pads and completely change and never actually stand on them. So you've got to remember that this foot is a sensory organ, and it's such a rich environment. It's like a little mini brain, and it's picking up all kinds of information, and it's relaying that back to the nervous system, back to the brain. And this is the piece that I would love to understand, is how we can see this kind of reset in the nervous system so quickly. And yet I've seen it many, many times. The last thing to think about is frequency. So you have density, that's varying the amount of instability. Duration, that's the length of time you have the horses stand on the pads. And frequency is how often you have the horse stand on pads. And again, this is something that the horses get to choose. Obviously, if you're a body worker, you're going to bring the pads out when you're going to see the horse, probably about once a month. If you're a veterinarian, you might be using that during your examination or your treatment, or when you're working with the horse. If you're a trainer, you might be using that in your training system. And so maybe not every day with those horses. And then if you're a horse owner, you might wind up being able to use the pads every day. But of course, the horse gets to choose. So some horses want to stand on pads every day. Some horses only want it a couple of times a week. Some of them want it even fewer times, like maybe once every 2 weeks, and some once a month. And again, this is something to explore and understand with your horse. So it may be that your horse wants to see the pads every day for a week and then is not interested for a while, which is great. You just come back in a week or so and you offer again. We've actually had some horses that wouldn't stand on pads at all. And then one day the mare didn't feel good, and the person offered her a pad to stand on. And now she nickers at that pad. So she felt the benefit from it. And now she's very excited to see that pad come out. I think that's the thing that's most important for me, is that as you work with the SureFoot pads, it gives you an opportunity to see how your horse responds, become more in touch with how easy it is to pick up their feet, or whether or not they want to give you one foot but not another, or maybe they want one density but not a different one, like they like a harder pad versus a softer pad. But they get to show you. So you're the facilitator in this process, and they get to show you what they want and how they want it. Now, one of the things too is that I don't always take no as no, never. allowing the horse to say no, to say, I don't want it under that foot, and then taking them for a little walk provides them with some options. And I think that that's one of the things that's so interesting with SureFoot. And then you can come back and offer again, and they're going to say yes. So, you know, we have to be sort of playful with this, and it's not a rigid system. And I think that's for some people, that's really hard to understand, that it's a very kind of dynamic system. It flows, and it's really that interaction with you and your horse. And as you do that, I have one student, and she's been using her SureFoot pads now for about 7 months. And she says she goes out to the arena, she takes her pads, and the horse is like really excited and follows her out. And she just does a session with her horse in the arena. You know, that's a non-riding day. Although you can use it before you ride, but in her case, it's a non-riding day, and she interacts with her horse, and he follows her around, and he loves the pads. But it's something they do together, and it's something that he enjoys. And I think that when we start offering to the horse, they're so much more appreciative. They're so much more engaged, and they'll interact with us in a unique, different way that lets us see more of who their true character is. Okay, does anybody have any questions about anything I've talked about so far? Because I think what I'm going to do next is start to show you some videos of different horses, and I'm really hoping that the videos play well. So if you have any questions, just pop it in the chat there. And my biggest problem is that I have so many videos that it's hard to choose. Where do I want to start here? And one of the things you need to know about video is that when I'm working with horses, in the beginning, when I'm just doing like 1 foot at a time and they're walking off, I'm not videoing because I'm busy. I'm working. So then a lot of times you see video where their horses are on multiple pads, either several feet. And that's because we've progressed in that session to that point. But it can be a bit deceiving sometimes because you think that, you know, that's what's going to happen every time, because that's when the videos show up. Okay, so I am going to play this video. I'm going to swing this over here so I can make sure that you guys can see what I'm seeing. Great. Oh, wrong thing. Oops. Hang on. Did the wrong thing. Let me just stop share for a second so I don't make you nauseous as I like scroll through all these videos. I lost the one I was looking at. Okay. I have them all set up. Well, we'll just use this one. Okay, so this is a horse that's on hard pads, and right now he's on 2 hard pads. And people often ask me, you know, why am I doing this with the rider on board? Well, the first thing you need to realize is that I'm a riding instructor. That is my profession. And that's, you know, my focus is I want to help horses feel different with the rider on. Now, obviously, you start with the rider off and make sure that the horse is okay with pads, and you start with 1 pad. And in this particular video, the horse is on 2 hard pads. Okay. And you can see that he stepped back with his foot, and you can see that Wendy is a camera person. I'm just going to stop that. But you saw how we got like an immediate lick and chew. Okay. And that is not the best video to show you because it clearly wasn't the one I intended. Hang on. Let me just get my videos sorted out again. Let me just stop screen share for a second. I don't know what happened here. Okay, SureFoot. And then we're going to go videos. So, Okay, thanks for holding. Nothing like having it all queued up and then losing it. Oh, here. Okay, so this horse here is on a half physio pad. It's the lowest profile pad. It's only 1.5 inches thick. And it's just 1 foot. And so what I want you to notice is the deep eye blinks, the relaxed ears, the licking and chewing. And so that's just from the lowest profile pad we have. You can see these kinds of changes. And this is what's so fascinating. You know, people ask me like, well, you know, horses on all different surfaces, how do these work? I don't have a good answer for you. I just have been doing this for 12 years now, and it's consistent. It's consistent and repeatable. Okay, so you can see the licking and chewing, the eye blinking, the breathing changes, the deep eye blinks, and they've associated deep eye blinks with parasympathetic. It's pretty obvious in this horse's case that there's a lot of relaxation, and it's just from the half physio pad, something really, really simple. And clearly I took the rider off before I did this. Okay, so I'm going to find the next video for you. Okay, this video is a little bit grainy, but this horse is on 4 firm pads. Now, obviously, they didn't start with 4 firm pads, okay? It's just a video that I wanted to show you because one of the things that you'll start to see with horses is you'll start to see a lot of swaying. The other thing to notice is where the horse has his head placed. So he has his head way to the left, and we'll watch, and you can see that he starts to sway, but even then he keeps his head way to the left, which is kind of interesting. So just notice how he's shifting his weight from side to side, and there's a big breathing change. When you see horses doing a lot of swaying, this is where you've got to be careful and reduce your duration. So this is a video taken in Europe that was sent to me. You know, clearly you can see the horse is quite relaxed with the whole thing. But when you start to see a lot of swaying, you do, especially in the beginning, want to start decreasing your duration. Excuse me a second. I'm just going to. Is that better now? Okay. So this is down in Costa Rica. This is a horse that's extremely familiar with pads. The first thing I want to point out is the horse next to him who's on hard pads. And look at how braced his legs is. And this is why you want to start harder before you go softer, because if you put him on really soft pads, it would be too much for him. Okay, I somehow muted myself. But this horse here, he's been on pads a lot. He's a very hot type of horse, and you can see just how much he's swaying. But in his case, it's very intentional. And again, I'm doing this with a rider on board because the horses have to carry us. They have to carry weight, and they have to figure out how to balance underneath us. So also horses have habits based on being ridden. And by using SureFoot pads under saddle, you can influence those behavior patterns, especially like a horse that doesn't like a certain corner of the arena. That's a great place to do SureFoot with that horse, because he's going to really like the pads, and you can change that perception of that the corners are tough. But this horse, you can see he sways very intentionally. He's very much checking it out. There's nothing unstable about that particular horse in terms of, well, what do I mean by that? He's rocking and rolling around, but he's doing it consciously, like exploring, versus a horse that you'll see that's on pads and literally he'll fall off. Like they'll start to sway a little bit and they'll sway themselves right off. You know, the environments where you can use SureFoot pads, this is just an example of this horse is in a round pen on a lunge line, and we used the SureFoot pads with him, and then we moved him on the lunge. So, you know, it's not always possible to have a horse under saddle, or say, you know, you're by yourself. You can have them on a lunge, or you can just move them in the round pen and just give them that option of offering them and then having them move. I really like to have movement after they've stood on the pads, because horses are designed to move, and you want them to integrate that information through movement. There are times when the horses simply just refuse. They don't want to move. They're just falling asleep and they're just going to stand there. And again, it's okay. So there's a lot of guidelines and very few rules with SureFoot. The guidelines being, keep your hands away from the hoof, listen to the horse, be curious, experiment. But it's also setting up the opportunity for the horse to experiment and feel his own body. I'm just going to see what this video is like. Oh, yeah. Okay. So just screen share again. And I'll just hit play. This was a very fit, young, warm blood jumper that was way too much horse for the owner. She came to this clinic, and so I just put him in the round pen and just experimented using pads. But he had the choice to walk off whenever he wanted to, and it's a really fun environment. It's a great way to play with your horses and just experiment. Is have them in a space where they're free to move around and just explore the different pads with them and see what they like. This was like his second day, and he's on a pair of firm pads. And what you notice is he's standing really quietly. And I think that that's the thing that you have to realize with this particular horse, is that was not what he was doing when we started. But he's standing very quietly. There's our little tail swish, you know, observing his environment, not reacting. And there's our neck down, our breathing change. And he's has the opportunity to step off when he chooses. And this is this video is about a minute long. So, you know, when you think about watching this video and watching it for a minute, that's actually a fairly long time. Which is why it's important to really kind of think about your duration, and even just have a stopwatch and just kind of check in with yourself to make sure that you're not having them stand there too long in the beginning. As they get stronger, like I said, as you watch them and they're not losing their balance and they're not overly swaying, then you can gradually increase the duration. But you see, he stepped off really, really quietly. And even though he alerted and heard a sound, he's still very much contemplating that. You can see his little lip there kind of hanging. Okay, let me stop share again. Oh, I had some great videos from behind. This horse here, Okay, this horse is on a single hard pad. I started with the left front, the uninjured leg, and you can see that he has a huge arthritic bump on his knee, right? So I don't start with the injury or if there's a problem. I go away from that leg to begin with so that the horse becomes familiar with the process, familiar with the pads. So as you can see, there's some other pads scattered around. I had started with the left front leg, and then I went to this leg after he already knew that he could step off. Because if it's uncomfortable for him, you want him to step off, right? And so notice that he put his foot forward, and then we got a lot of licking and chewing. The foam is the clover fungus that we have here in the summertime. That's what the foam is. But he chose to step off and then kind of reset himself there. So it's just super important to let horses choose and play with this. Where is that horse from behind? Oh, that's another really interesting. You know, you wind up with so many videos because you've been doing this for so long. Oh, and you see all your friends here. Oh, come on, video. Let's drop this sound down. Okay. So this is an older Icelandic. He's on firm pads, parafirm pads. Okay, you saw how he kind of reset his foot there. And look at the change in breathing, the flaring in the nostrils. This is not uncommon to see the nostrils flare quite a lot, to see some really, really deep breathing. And it's interesting how he just kind of resets himself there, right? You can see the relaxation, the blinking eyes. Again, this video is about a minute long. Okay, and you see that there's a little bit of swaying coming in. Deeper eye blinks, neck lowering. So these are all the very typical signs that we see with SureFoot pads, is that deep relaxation. Then you see the muzzle wiggle. And now he's starting to sway a little bit, right? So this is where, again, with an older horse, you want to work with harder pads, keep the duration short, make sure everything's okay, and then you can gradually increase your duration, your density, change your density, and then experiment with your frequency. That's the thing that that it's only by kind of working with the pads that you're going to figure out what the frequency is that your particular horse likes. Oh, where was that video? Did anybody have any questions while I'm lumbosacral challenges? I don't know what Recos is, Laura. So whenever you have, oh, there's that Stifle video. Whenever you have a problem, you want to really shorten your duration. Okay. If it's an injured leg, you do all the other legs. You don't do the injured leg unless the vet gives you approval and says it's okay to do that injured leg. And with, like, if you're rehabbing, they use a lot for rehabbing stifles. I'm always going to tell you to talk to your vet, find out what your vet's going to say, because it's really important that you keep them engaged in the process. Many of them don't know what SureFoot is. So I'll be at AAP. If you have a vet that's curious and hasn't ever seen SureFoot before, you're more than welcome to have them come and stop by my booth and visit with me so they can learn more about it. I think this is the one I wanted to show you. Yeah. Okay, so this video, this is a horse that had been on pads several times. Okay, he's on the soft pads and he's on them under the back feet. Okay, and you can see how the pelvis is starting to sway. And again, sometimes it's easier to watch the rider, and you can see that movement there. He just swayed to the left and then came back. So, when you're if you have horses with weak stifles or something like that, and you're looking at strengthening them, just think about you in an exercise program that you would do short duration in the beginning and gradually increase. Start with your harder pads, because you can't take it back if you make them sore. And it's really so important to listen to your horse, because they're the ones. Recommendations or video. So I'm not a vet. I can't make recommendations, but we do have a vet. Her name is Dr. Kelleher, and she's now at Ohio State. And she's been doing a survey to find out how many vets are using SureFoot pads. And I've been talking to her about coming up with protocols for different things. But, you know, it's really important that you have a good diagnosis, because without a good diagnosis of what's going on, you could make things worse using pads, right? It's just like a person. If you've got a problem and then you use pads on an unstable leg, an injury, say, you could make it worse. So it's just really important to engage your body worker, your farrier, your vet, you know, your team in terms of what to do and how often to do that. So, you know, and this is where I work really hard to stay on the right side of veterinarians, so that they feel positive about SureFoot and the benefits of it. But this is a little Mustang who had difficulty cantering. This is day one. I did her in the round pen with no halter or anything. And then we did a little bit outside. And then this is like day 4. And she was really super interesting because she started to really connect into her body. But you can see how much movement there is there. And then she steps off. So that's 27 seconds there before she steps off. Okay. And you could see just how much movement we had in those 27 seconds. And I don't know if this is the video where she startles. Yeah. So with your Mustangs and things, she got very concerned because she hadn't really figured out that she was standing on 4 pads, but then she got very curious about it. So as you increase the number of pads, you, of course, you go back to decreasing the duration until you see how the horse is going to respond. Oh, I don't want to make you sick here. Scrolling. So this is hard pads, right? The orange are hard. This was a horse that had laminitis, and she was recovering from laminitis. So she's on the hard pads in front and the hard slants behind at this point. And they're just going to give to heat and pressure. There's not going to be any lateral give to these pads. They're just going to give directly to that heat and pressure. So they bring, it's, you know, I pretty much, when I start with a horse, I'm going to kind of go through that pad process of starting like with a half physio and then going to hard. And a lot of times, like the first session, I stop right there. Hard is plenty. Hard is enough. Then in further sessions, I can go into other densities and start mixing and matching and doing underneath different feet. But it's so important. This is just, I'm just going to show you this because I think this is just so cute. This is this same horse. She fell asleep with her nose on the rail. So she just totally fell asleep right there, just from offering her that. Okay, questions. Talked about caution when using pads with Stifle. Yeah, so with Hocks, well, the question is, you know, is there something going on in the Hocks? Do you have inflammation? Do you have arthritis? Whenever you have any question about whether or not, you know, things are okay, you want to start harder and then see how the horse is. Like if I get an older horse that's arthritic, I'll start hard and then I'll gradually move through the system. And then I'm going to show you this video because I haven't shown you a lot of this. This is a little therapeutic pony. Okay, so he'd been on pads many times. This was a therapeutic riding center. that they use pads regularly with their therapeutic horses to bring in relaxation and comfort. And in this area here, they would set up stations, and they'd have a beamer station, and they'd have SureFoot pad station, and they'd have other stations. And they'd turn the horses out, and the horses would choose which station they wanted to go to. Excuse me. And the horses would choose, certain horses would choose to go over to the SureFoot pads. So this is a pony that's very familiar with SureFoot. He's a therapeutic pony. And at this point, he's on pods. And pods are advanced because you have to be able to target the foot. And look at just how much movement you have there. And when you watch the activation in that stifle, you can see how you've got to, again, keep the duration short because there's a lot of movement going on there. He's very relaxed. He's very comfortable. You couldn't set him up on 4 pods if he wasn't. But then when you see this amount of movement, this video is 30 seconds, right? You want to keep your duration short. Yep. And then he's so familiar. He's like, I'm done. That was 32 seconds. So yeah, a lot can happen. A lot can be done in a short period of time. Let's see. If you have horses that are really difficult for the farrier, this is a great thing to use with them, is to get them familiar with SureFoot pads, because, you know, shoeing a horse is, or even trimming, is a dangerous occupation if the horse is uncomfortable. And the more we can make the horses more stable and more comfortable by offering a pad underneath the foot that that's on the ground, you know, the horses are going to appreciate it. The farrier is going to have an easier job. Everybody's going to be safer, and you come away. In many cases now we have horses that don't need to be drugged anymore to be shod because they've used the SureFoot pads. Let's just test a load. I haven't really talked much about medium. Medium pads are springy. So this is a horse on medium. And you know what you notice there is she can turn her head way far around but remain very stable. So I'm just going to take this back so you can see, like, here's her chest line, and she's taking her head way far around, but she's basically remaining quite stable on the pads and not a lot of swing. I always watch when they move their head to see whether or not there's a huge amount of sway, or if I see a real difference in the pectoral muscles, if one side gets higher or lower. Okay. And you can see how she's got activation in both of her pecs when she turns her head, and she's basically keeping her weight. I can't get the little thing out of the way. Keeping her weight quite even on the 2 pads. So that's one of the things to look for, is to really watch that chest line and watch those pectoral muscles. And you can see we've got our deep eye blinks and our relaxation. When they're standing on pads, a lot of horses, when they're on 2 pads, you'll see their pecs become very uneven. See if I have a video showing that that's handy. Need one that's long enough. Let's try this one. Okay, so we see a lot of licking and chewing right now. Looks pretty equal on the 2 pads. These are the original set. They're 8 years old, still functioning, still working. And right here, you can see that the pecs actually look quite even. You see a lot of relaxation in the face. You know, if you're struggling with your horse in terms of uneven in the shoulders or not yielding your leg, stopping and putting them on SureFoot pads for a short period of time, even just get off and put them on pads and get back down, you might find you have a completely different horse. This isn't showing you what I wanted to show you. Let me just see if I can find another video here. Obviously, I have way too many videos, and they are not well labeled because, oh, this was such an interesting horse. I'm not sure we're going to see the pec muscles. What I'm talking about. a little bit. Again, by the time I can step back and take videos, the horse is usually on multiple pads, okay? This was a little horse that came to me for a riding clinic, and she only had one lead, and she only had one lead in the field. And so on day one, I started her with SureFoot pads, and that night, the owner saw her canter on the lead that she wouldn't take. And the next day, we brought her in and we put her back on pads, and she cantered on both leads. So you can see how there's some swaying going on here, and then the pec muscles get unlevel, and you'll see like when she swings over, they start to get like lower on one side and higher on the other. And so that's one thing to really pay attention to there. You can see how much it changed right there in the end and how much she leaned over onto that left front. You know, the pads are versatile. And I think that the thing that what I find watching people start with them is that first they don't know what to do with the ThruFoot pads, and then they kind of mess around with them a little, and then they kind of forget about them, and then you come back and you pick them up again and you do a little more, and it's a gradual process of kind of sorting out, you know, how they work and how you integrate it into your life. And you know, I think that that's one of the things that's so much fun about this is that it's a process and it's an experimentation. And I'm always fascinated, like the one person I said that, you know, when she started, like I did some pads with her, and now every week she takes her horse into the arena and they do a SureFoot pad session. You can integrate it into your grooming, but please don't have the horses on cross ties when you put them on pads, because you want them to be able to let their neck down. And by putting them on cross ties, they can't do that. So we're kind of conflicting them between relaxation and lengthening their top line and keeping them on cross ties. It's always a good idea to walk them in between offering pads because you want them to integrate that movement, that feeling that they gathered from the pads into movement, because they are movement-based creatures. You might find that you really like standing on the SureFoot pads, that they help you with your balance. I actually keep a full physio pad in my bathroom and stand on that, brushing my teeth morning and night. And it's really helped me with some sciatic pain I was struggling with. So, you know, it's what I would tell you is start simple and then listen to your horse and let him show you what he likes, how long, which density, how often, and really notice that when you offer the horse the opportunity to show you how he feels about it and what he likes, that you reach a whole nother level of dialogue with your horse, a whole nother level of trust. And you know, that for me, it's just so much fun watching horses. I've been doing this now for over 12 years, and yet I'm still fascinated every time I put a horse on SureFoot pads. So thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Have a great Monday night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.